Well, welcome to Chapter 4. As typical, we start out with the big picture, which we'll get to in just a second. This chapter really deals with what are the rules, or how do you start a corporation? How do you organize that? So imagine somebody having a business idea, wanting to start a corporation, existing businesses turning into corporations, and so on. So usually maybe somebody starts out as a sole proprietorship or a partnership. The company takes off, the idea takes off. We want to form a corporation, kind of like what we talked about last chapter with the bakery. A very successful business organized as a sole proprietorship, but then maybe we switch over to a corporation because of the tax benefits. So in this scenario, Emily has operated a business as a sole prop for 2 years. David is a friend from college, been collaborating with Emily, and they developed an innovative software app. As soon as the app was introduced in the market, it was an immediate hit. It's gained increasing recognition in the market, and sales have continued to rise. Emily is convinced that the upside potential for even more growth is significant. She realizes that a leap in the level of growth will require a large infusion of capital, and she can't fund it personally with her personal resources. So switching over to a corporation might be the way to go. And so Emily's friend Ethan is a venture capitalist and enthusiastic about making a large investment in exchange, of course, for an equity position in the business. Emily and Ethan each contribute assets in exchange for stock of this newly formed company called Transformation. Emily also has asked David, an invaluable employee and a major contributor to the app's development, if he'd be interested in becoming a shareholder of Transformation. He was given the option of transferring either property or services in exchange for stock. However, at this point, David has not decided what he should do. Okay, so we've got Emily and Ethan as contributors, and David's kind of just thinking about it. And the same chart that you see right here is on the bottom of page 1 of chapter 4. So Emily receives 200 shares of stock in exchange for the transfer of the sole proprietorship assets of the new corporation. So all the assets of the company are contributed to the new corporation. In exchange, she receives $200 shares. So the adjusted basis of the assets are right here. AR, building, and basically the proprietary information of the app, and the fair market value of each. Ethan contributes $48 million worth of cash, and in exchange receives 4,800 shares of stock. What are the tax and non-tax implications? And then read the chapter to formulate a response. So that's essentially the big overarching topic to think through here. So corporation issues, then, this is kind of where it starts on page 2. The chapter addresses issues such as tax consequences of the shareholders and the corporation upon organizing and transferring property, tax result that ensues when the shareholders make transfers of property, capital structure of the corporation, including equity and debt financing, tax treatment of investor losses, and special treatment given to gain realized from the disposition of qualified small business stock. So the general rule here of the transaction, shareholders are contributing cash or property to the corporation in exchange for corporate stock. Control is required. Shareholders must own 80% of the stock after the transfer. So an example, Ron will incorporate his sole proprietorship with asset tax basis and fair market values. There are differences, the differences in land, building, furniture, and fixtures. Without this, he'd have a gain, right? So with this, there's no gain, because essentially what you're saying is that his economic status has not changed. We just have a new business form. So his business form is new. That doesn't change his economic status. So we're not going to tax him for a capital gain. So in general, there's no gain or loss with transfers, as long as you're receiving stock and you still have control of the corporation. Now, it might be different, though, if there's boot. So boot is property other than stock is received by the transfers. Then there may be a gain. So typically cash. Recognize the gain up to the lesser of the boot received or a realized gain, but no loss can be recognized. But a gain might be, but no loss. And so they kind of start to show us then some general rules here to follow and think about. Property is broad and includes cash, secret processes and formulas, unrealized AR, installment obligations, excludes services from the definition of property though. Stock transferred includes both common and preferred stock, does not include stock rights or stock warrants, and does not include corporate debt or securities. So then coming back to the big picture, assume that the proposed transaction involving Emily and Ethan qualifies under Section 351, but Emily decides to receive some corporate debt along with the stock. So now it's going to change just a little bit. If she receives stock worth $1.9 million and debt worth $100,000 in exchange for the property transferred, Emily will have a gain of $1.6 million. $2 million of consideration received, minus $400,000 basis in the transfer of the property. Remember, that was kind of the fair market value of the property that she contributed. However, because the transaction qualifies under Section 351, only $100,000 worth of that gain is recognized. So the $100,000 transformation debt is considered to be boot, and basically the rest of the gain is deferred. Issues regarding transformation, again, the transfers must be in control immediately after to qualify for the non-tax treatment. The whole point is to do this and not be taxed, and that has to be in 80% of the voting shares. So immediately after does not require simultaneous transfer. If more than one transferor, rights of the party should be outlined before the first transfer, and transfers should occur as close together as possible. So don't delay them, spread them out over a bunch of time. Kind of have a document prepared that all the parties know what the rights are of each. So coming back to the big picture, assume that the proposed transaction involving Emily and Ethan occurs as described. However, in addition, David will now contribute property in exchange for equity. So David's going to jump on board. David was the employee. So as a result, Emily exchanges her property for 200 shares. David exchanges his property for 10 shares. Ethan exchanges his property for 4,800 shares. And they'll happen between January 7 to March 5. Because the three exchanges are part of a prearranged plan and the control test is met, Section 351 applies. No tax has to be paid. After control is achieved, it's not necessarily lost upon the sale or gift of stock received and the transfer to others not party to the initial exchange, but disposition right might violate 351 if prearranged. So the transfers may result in service provider being treated as a member of the control group. So now we're including services being transferred, taxed on the value of stock issued for services, not taxed on value of stock received for property contributions. So to be considered a member of the control group, the service provider should transfer property given more than a relatively small value. Because remember, for David, he was an employee, so he has the opportunity to contribute property or services, but it really behooved him to be able to contribute some property to avoid not paying tax on the services. Okay, so just keep that in mind. The next part is about assumption of liabilities. And I should mention too, they go through lots of property examples in Chapter 4. Pages 7, 8, and 9 are several examples of transfers. Then they talk about the assumption of liabilities are on pages 10 and 11. So in general, assumption of liabilities by the corporation does not result in boot to the transfer, shareholder, or gain recognition purposes. Liabilities are treated as boot for determining basis in the acquired stock. So coming back to the big picture, it says, assume you learn that David's not interested in becoming a stockholder, Emily and Ethan will transfer their property for 100% of the shares. In addition, Emily's building is subject to a liability worth $70,000. That transformation assumes. Consequently, Emily receives her transformation stock and is relieved of the $70,000 liability in exchange for property with the basis of $400,000, the market value of $200,000. So still a tax-free exchange. The release liability is not treated as boot. However, the basis in the stock is now $330. So if she goes to sell at some point in the future, her basis is now $330 instead of $400,000. So she might have a bigger taxable gain when she goes and sells the stock, if she ever does somewhere down the road. So liabilities are not treated as boot for gain recognition unless the liability is incurred for no business purpose or as tax avoidance. Obviously that's a different story then. So an example of that, they give us the same type of examples. Let's see, they're on kind of starting on pages 12. Property transferred has fair market value of $150, basis of $100, a gain of $50. Liabilities assumed by corporation. Independent facts. We've got 3 different possibilities here, and what the purposes are: liability of $80, $120, or $120. So here we've got business purpose 1, 2, 3, the fair market value received, liabilities assumed, the amount realized, the basis of the property, and then what the gain or loss realized would be. Okay, and then again, independent facts here. So liabilities assumed. You can see here boot business purpose 1. None, no gain, none, $20,000 gain, and then 120, $50,000 gain. The gain is the lesser of $50,000 realized gain of the boot. And then the basis computation for Section 351 exchange is kind of what that computation looks like. The adjusted basis of property plus gain recognized minus boot received minus adjustment for property loss, if so elected, gives you the basis of the stock received, which of course then is important if you go and sell the stock at some point in the future and determines what your capital gain or loss would be. And then this talks about adjusted basis of property transferred plus gain received minus adjustment for lost property, and so on. So this is the corporation's basis then. Liabilities assumed by the corporation, independent of facts, the 3 different liabilities, or the 3 different purposes, the basis of transferable assets, the gain recognized, and the basis to the corporation. And then it says here then what our basis will be. We've got the basis and assets transferred, the gain recognized, the liability transferred, and the basis of the stock, what that would be then. Now, what happens if there's a built-in loss? Built-in loss property is contributed to a corporation. The aggregate basis in the property may have to be stepped down, so basis not exceed fair market value. So that's just one thing to consider. Then the other side of that is step down in basis is allocated among assets with built-in losses. So built-in loss adjustment places loss with either the shareholder or the corporation, but not both. That's the key, not both.